thank you to ITRenew, our hardware track partner, for making this one possible. And a reminder again that what is shared here are trends from the group discussions. They represent leaders from dozens of companies all over the world, and the trends are not to be attributed to the track chairs or their companies. So joining me for the hardware panel is Curt Belusar from Apple and Mark Shaw from Microsoft. All right. So first off, thanks guys for jumping in. We're going to throw up the bullets here. I wanted to start with you, Curt, and just give me your thoughts about the session.
First of all, Dean, thanks. I know everybody's been saying thank you, but thank you so much for putting this together. It was another rich discussion in our session. So it was just a good collection of people and great set of topics that we talked about. And also thanks to the hardware track team members, because they really brought the discussion forward. So appreciate that. It was interesting. We jumped in and we talked about utilization was one of the first things that we talked about in my track. And it did have a relationship to COVID. I think COVID's affecting everybody in different ways. We heard about supply chain aspects of operations being affected by COVID. But one of the things that was brought up, just in general, I would say a theme is that we have to get better utilization out of our servers. And the way that was related to COVID is that someone had raised the point that, because the supply chain was pinched a little bit, it was a little bit harder to get things in the door. So it needed to get creative and figure out how to better utilize the systems that were already there. I would just say that in general, utilization, is an issue. I think we took one poll for our team, and it showed that it was slightly above 50% had their machines more than 50% utilized. And so think about that for a moment. That means that there's a lot of machines sitting around that are less than 50% utilized. And, I'm sure we've all experienced that in our data centers to a certain extent. So out of that, some of the things that were discussed by the team is that to be able to go and start to, containerize or virtualize, is very necessary to be able to go raise utilization. But also, you have to have control of your applications to be able to do that. So that was one of the themes that came out, is that, you have to, the more control of the stack that you can get, you can actually start to, look at doing orchestration and moving workloads around potentially, and, looking at your power. The second thing that came up that was kind of a 1B under that conclusion is that you have to have access to the telemetry in the data center, and potentially the ability to control things in the data center. It's either telemetry so that you can see how much power you're drawing, off of different systems or different racks, or potentially the ability to power cap as well. But you've got to have some sort of control. So that was one conclusion. I think a second conclusion or discussion that went along with that is, is it easier in owned data centers versus colos, was a theme that was bounced around. And, certainly if you're in your own data center and you own your stack from top to bottom and you own your telemetry, there's an aspect of that, if you're doing that at volume, that does make it easier to control everything. But, the question came up is, can you do it in a colo? And I think that it's harder to do it in a colo today, but not impossible to do it going forward. And one of the points that was brought up is this is partially the customers or industry's fault for not driving the requirement to have telemetry into contracts, or the requirement, to be able to see some of this data and then be able to, control things across the colo. And that brought up a really good point, that there's still a need to standardize the interface, interfaces into either getting this telemetry or potentially even orchestrating, around the data center across the industry. And I thought that was a really good point. There was one more conclusion that came up that was a great discussion related to this utilization theme, and it was about coding apps to be stateless from the get-go. In other words, obviously it's very easier to port stateless apps around. If you've got stateful apps, you may actually have to isolate those, and they might not be as portable as we would like them to be. So that was a really powerful discussion, and so that touched on there was utilization. You can see the power utilization in the colos point up there. And the last one that I'll go to is liquid cooling, just very briefly. We had a great discussion about liquid cooling. And the reason why this liquid cooling topic comes up is because we've got GPU boxes themselves that are going to pull 5 to 6 kilowatts coming up, per box. And then we've got processors, that today maybe many of us sit in a, sub 100 watts per processor, maybe up to 150 watts. And for typical processors, I know there's SKUs that go higher, but all of a sudden we see these processors on the horizon. They're going to pull, over 200, maybe even over 300 watts per processor. And so that's why this liquid cooling topic is a hot topic. Do you like that?
Pun intended.
There you go. Pun intended. So the discussion in the group was that there's obviously liquid is more efficient at, pulling heat off of parts. I don't think there's any dispute about that. Most of the discussion amongst the group is there's, a camp that said, hey, we're all going to have to go to liquid cooling. And there was a camp that said that, well, air is here to stay. And I think that honestly, both are true. There's going to be certain kinds of deployments where we are going to have to do more and more liquid cooling, is my personal take. And I don't think air is going to go away either. There's going to be whole sets of deployments where that's still going to be commoditized and okay.
Yeah. And Curt, just really important pieces of this. The waste one makes so much. It resonates with me because we've got just buffers on buffers on buffers. I mean, from the utility all the way down to the CPU. And if you look at all that, the amount of waste in here, because the 50% you're talking about is just for a spot in time, but what about everything else around it? And by the way, what we've seen is it's probably even less than that when you really dig into it from the average. So there's huge potential. And the last thing on that is that here we had this pandemic with massive increases, and the majority of companies absorb them, which means there's a significant amount of excess capacity that was out there. And this new baseline, now how do we keep that utilization up? But Mark, let's jump into your thoughts.
Yeah. So one thing that really stood out in some of our discussions was this topic here of proliferation of SKUs. So the hardware that's coming along, it's rapidly evolving. It's very diverse. The CPU vendors are throwing roadmaps at us that just the CPUs just seem to be flying at us. Once a year, twice a year. That sort of thing. There's accelerators coming, and then you throw in the AI ML stuff. So like Curt said, the 6 kilowatt device, right? I think I read on the web that was actually 9 kilowatts in a single box. You can look that up, and that sort of thing is really putting a lot of stress and challenge into the users, right? So, on one hand, you want to limit the number of SKUs, limit the amount of hardware you're bringing in, because that increases your efficiency, your ability to maintain them, that sort of thing. But if you're trying to deliver capacity, if you're trying to deliver what the people need, what your customers need, well, then you have to buy it, right? And you have to bring it in. But then once you bring it in, how do you make sure that it's secure, right? How do you make sure that you've got the right firmware on it? There's no bad actors playing in there. That's one of the things that's really top of mind, is how do you deal with the firmware and how to keep those guarantees of security there. Mm-hmm. And then as you're running your services and that sort of thing, and the people come along and say, hey, I need this application, right? If you can't deliver it, well, you can go out and you can look for a third-party cloud out there, that sort of thing. Whether it works well with your infrastructure or not, that's always an option, right? You can go there, but is it really the right thing for your group? It's just really hard to keep up. Part of this demand is actually, it comes more and more from the application developers themselves. So normally, customer or, people would build like, here's your standard SKU, that sort of thing, put a web browser on it or put a database server on it, that sort of thing. But now, we're getting all this specialized hardware. And one person came up with a quote. I got to read you this quote. It's awesome. It says, apparently someone is letting the software designers read hardware magazines.
Yes, I remember
And
that.
so there are app people who are asking for specific hardware platforms. I'm not sure when we allowed that. So, that just speaks to, the incredible hardware that's coming along and how you can actually use it to further your business.
Yeah. So this, if you think about everything that just was laid out here, think 10, 15 years ago when everyone was talking about the liquid cooling and densities didn't rise at the pace that everyone was expecting. Then machine learning, AI, the GPUs, TPUs, everything else is rolling out. Like you said, 6 kilowatts in 4U, 9 kilowatts in 4U. Okay, 50 to 100 kilowatts in a rack, right? So there's so many changes happening now, and we're kind of hitting that point where I was expecting this to happen sooner, but now really ML and AI are driving it. And the other point about security you mentioned, that was a big thread in there too. Whether it's TPM chips, et cetera, in there to make sure that there are no bad actors, that these devices that are coming in. But I think people were saying there were so many different things that had to be qualified. That's the challenge here. It's like how to get to standardization, as Curt was saying, simplification, fewer SKUs, right? Fewer offerings. So excellent. Well, guys, I could talk to you all day about this. I really want to, but thank you for your insights here. Curt, you're going to be joining us on the main panel here in a little bit. Again, appreciate all the work you guys did on the hardware track here, and I know that the attendees really appreciate it as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for having us.
All right. Thanks, guys.